Well, hello again, everyone, and thank you to all who have joined us so far today. My name is Shane Schick, and I'm a technology writer and editor who frequently talks to CIOs and directors and other executives about how they can use technology in a more strategic way, and that includes a lot of people in public sector organizations like the government. Today we are presenting Embracing the Modern Mobile Workforce, and just a few days before we were planning to put this event on today, I actually came across a headline in another publication in the US that really kind of reinforced why today's topic is so important. The headline appeared in a publication called Federal Computer Week, and the headline said, "The federal government must prioritize mobile now." And it was quoting a report from the US Presidential Commission on Enhancing National Cybersecurity, and it said, "The days of employees working only at an office using an organization-issued desktop computer fully managed by the organization are largely over. Mobile technologies are heavily used by almost every organization's employees, but they're often not considered as high a priority as other kinds of computing platforms." I think that's true not only in the government, but in many different kinds of organizations. And I think the data here in Canada supports it even more. Just a few short months ago, an organization called Catalyst released an annual research report that tracks usage in this country, and it noted that Canadian smartphone ownership is now at 76%. So for the first time, 3 out of every 4 Canadians own a smartphone. Maybe even more important than that is what they're doing with those devices. Just before the holiday season that we just had, there was another report from Juniper Research which suggested that between now and the year 2021, there's going to be a rising in popularity of 4K content, which means that the data usage on mobile devices is set to quadruple. If you think about what all that means, it means that smartphones and tablets and other mobile devices are going to reach 774,000 petabytes between the next several years, which is equivalent to 81 billion hours of 4K streaming. For a lot of organizations, that poses a great opportunity, but also a great challenge in terms of how to decide how best to use those technologies, how to create value for them, and perhaps most importantly, how to transition their organization, their employees, other stakeholders into using these things in a way that makes the most sense for their organization. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. With me today is Matthew Leppanen, the Director of Product Management for Unified Communications at the Rogers Enterprise Business Unit. He's going to walk through some of the things that Rogers has been seeing in this space and some of the opportunities that are presented to the public sector audience in particular. And then I'm going to be asking him some questions as well to kind of bounce off some of the things that I've noticed in the writing and research that I've been doing over the last several years. Of course, you'll have questions as well, and we'll have all the participants muted until we get to a formal Q&A at the end, but you can type questions or comments in the chat function, which you should see a little window on the console when you joined the webinar. Also, unlike most kinds of webinars and conference events that you may attend where they ask you to put away your mobile devices and turn off your smartphones, we're actually asking you to keep them very close at hand, because we're going to have text polls, which means you'll be asked to text in your answers. Now, all the answers will be confidential, and it's really just meant to help with the conversation. And actually, this is a good chance for me to segue a little bit and ask Matthew just to explain a little bit about how the text polling function will work.
Thanks, Shane. So you'll see on your screen that we actually have some instructions for you to follow along to participate in the actual text poll. We don't need you to do anything right now other than maybe register, and we'll instruct you when we're actually going to do a text poll. There's 2 different ways that you're going to be able to participate. The first is using your mobile phone, which is quite pertinent to today's discussion. How you're going to do this, you'll see in step 1, the phone number that you'll send a text message to is 37607, and all you have to do is send the word briefing to that number and hit send, and you will be registered into the actual text poll application. We'll give you instructions again after when you want to exit it. You'll be able to text leave and you'll exit out of there. If for some reason you do not have your mobile phone handy at this moment, you can also go to the web poll portion of it, which is at www.pollev.com/briefing, and that's on the upper right-hand corner of the slide. We'll repeat these instructions again later on, but we encourage everyone to take part in the text poll. It is fully confidential. We are just aggregating all of the results. That way we can have a discussion on how you, the audience, feels about some of these areas that we're going to have some discussion on. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Matthew. So I think a lot of people who are attending today's webinar have heard the term mobile workforce. It might have been, a blog post they read or a conference that they attended before. Some organizations, actually have a formalized mobile workforce strategy. When you think of, the term modern mobile workforce, how do you define it, and what does that mean for this audience?
It's a great question, Shane. Modern mobile workforce can mean many different things to many people, but I think some of the data points and some of the recent research findings that you shared just at the top of this webinar really help articulate what do we mean by a modern mobile workforce. A couple different things that we want to keep in mind as we go through this webinar. We use mobile technology pervasively through our consumer lives, and that same usage is entering into our business lives. And more employees are choosing to use their mobile phone, whether it's part of their organization's supplied technology or it's even their own personal device. And we're no longer sitting at a desk to get all of our work done. So we're not just talking about the mobile technology, but we're talking about the behaviors in the way that we're actually working. And embracing that and helping to facilitate people to work more effectively wherever, whenever they want, is what we mean by the modern mobile workforce. And we'll go through some data points and help illustrate what that really means in the coming slides.
So the reality for a lot of organizations is that mobile is one part of many different kinds of priorities and opportunities that they're looking at that involve technology. It will not be news to anybody who has probably joined this webinar today, but as you know, last year the Government of Canada unveiled its IT strategic plan. We've actually only got 3 years between now and 2020, and there are some very aggressive objectives in there on how to transform the government in terms of the way it operates, reducing costs, improving service delivery to Canadians. Considering the modern mobile workforce that you just kind of defined, what are some of the specific challenges that can be addressed by some of the technologies that Rogers offers and that you're talking to customers about today?
Yeah, so actually, if we start looking at some of the organizational telecom trends that we can see, throughout Canada, and these are Canada-specific data points, we've hit almost 100% mobile penetration within the Canadian market when you combine both mobile devices like smartphones, Blackberries, and other personal handheld devices, combined with things like tablets that are also using mobile chips. This has gotten us to just under 100% penetration within the market, and that's projected to start growing quite dramatically. Within that, there were some really interesting data points that we've actually seen that I think are interesting when you look at both from a private sector as well as public sector impact. Sometimes there are certain leading indicators that we first see in the private sector before they enter in the public sector domain, and then vice versa. Right now, 34% of business respondents that were recently surveyed in 2016, 34% actually have responded that they've substituted their landline with a mobile phone, meaning that 34% of those individuals have already stated, I've just used my mobile phone for everything. I don't use that desk phone sitting on my desk or at my cubicle. It could be because they're not there. It could be because it's just not convenient for them anymore. And that's a common trend that we see when we look around a lot of office environments. You might actually see even cubicles that are, they've been assigned, but they're unoccupied at the moment, and there's a phone sitting there, but the person is working, and they've chosen to work elsewhere. In terms of hosted versus cloud phone systems, 35% of respondents are also using a combination of hosted, managed, or cloud-based phone systems. And specifically, when we drill down into cloud unified communications usage, 46% of respondents said that they are using some form of cloud-based unified communications. All of these indicators are really important to show us that in accordance to what the government is trying to do with the 2020 plan, it's very similar to what a lot of other organizations are also trying to accomplish because of some of these trends that we're seeing throughout this research.
So you kind of mentioned just the surge and how much people are using this, but just getting a little bit deeper into that, there are many workers today, and I think particularly when we think about the millennial segment that's now a big part of the workforce, they've become accustomed to using mobile devices, both professional and personal uses, as you mentioned at the beginning. What are the trends that you're seeing, across the board for mobile usage in Canada in terms of, when they're using it, kind of the volume of requirements that they have?
Yes, Shane, we've seen some dramatic changes in the overall usage behavior from all individuals across this country in how they're using smartphones today. Early indicators are always great to look at from the millennial population because these are the generation who've grown up with mobile and internet technology through their entire lives. But what we're really interested in looking at is how that trend then permeates through the rest of the population base. What this information that we've got up on the slide now shows is actually when we start looking at the amount of time that eyeballs are looking at a smartphone screen, is there really a delineation between personal versus business usage? And what the research has actually identified for us is that there is no delineation. We have chosen to use our mobile devices at any time during the day or night based on the fact that it's most convenient, regardless if that work that we're doing on it is in a personal nature or it's in a business nature. A great example would be, a person who is getting ready for work in the morning may actually choose to pick up their mobile device and maybe clear off a couple of emails before they hit the road, or perhaps people who are commuting in public transit, while they've got that downtime, there's perhaps a great opportunity to catch up on some work, and maybe while they're in the office in between meetings, they're having to attend to a few personal matters on that device as well, and it goes on throughout the day. And that's why we can see these peaks and valleys through both business hours and personal hours, and those indicators are really important for us to understand because what they're telling us is that employees would like to be able to use these devices where they want, when they want, without having to really think about it as a personal or business use. And so that's really important when we start thinking about the future of how we're going to drive mobile usage within our organizations, making sure that we have the rules and the regulations in combination with the tools and technology that help facilitate productivity.
Well, so, again, I think when you look at that bar chart, I think it shows that there's a great potential for increased productivity. I think everyone likes having the access to these devices and to the data, but a lot of the sort of support that's traditionally been set up around that was not put in place with those kind of usage patterns in mind. So, showing that we're using it at all times of the day now, what does that mean for the way that organizations have to manage mobility, both inside the office and now outside the office?
Yeah, excellent questions. When we start looking at the overall impact to an organization and thinking about their workers and some of their behaviors, what the research has also showed us is that 70% of workers across this country have identified that they're mobile at some point during their workday, which means they're away from their fixed workspace. This could mean that an individual is working while they're at home, in transit, maybe it's within a coffee shop. It could also mean working between different offices aside from their home office, or within their same physical home office, they're not stationary at their desk. They're at meeting rooms, collaborating with peers at their desk. They're just somewhere other than their desk. What's really important to note, though, is we're seeing 70% of workers are saying that they're mobile. That's going to grow up to 85% by 2020. What we also know, and if you look into your own organization, has your organization actually enabled your workforce, 70% of your workforce, with mobile technology? That would include things like smartphones and BlackBerries. It would also include things like laptop computers, the enablement to be mobile and continue your productivity. And if you haven't, there's a lot of risk there, because if 70% are saying that they're mobile, how are they doing it? And are they using personal devices? In most cases they are. What's also interesting is that we found a stat that indicated that 50% of the cubicles within Canada are empty at any given time. I was a little bit alarmed when I first saw that stat, but when I start walking through a traditional office environment and you start actually looking and paying attention of how many people are actually sitting at a cubicle that's assigned, and I guarantee that you're probably going to be hard-pressed on most days to be able to count more than 50%. And that's because the other 50% who's not at their desk is actually doing their work elsewhere. So maybe it's not 70% that are mobile throughout their day, maybe it's 50%, but if your organization is also, again, not supplying mobile technology for that 50%, how are they doing it? And if they're using personal devices, that's a big risk to the organization. Some key things that you want to be looking at from a security perspective: how is data being accessed when an employee is not at their desk? Who is monitoring that access? From a public relations standpoint, what would happen if something enters the public domain? Someone's personal information, something confidential, something very strategic in nature. From a cost perspective, organizations have invested millions upon millions of dollars in physical infrastructure, be it cubicles and office space, to their local area network, phones sitting on a desk connected to a phone system, desktop computers, and it goes on and on. But if those aren't being used and they're being abandoned because people have to work elsewhere, that's a huge cost impact to the organization that you're wasting because individuals are choosing to use other technologies than what has been already supplied to them. And then how much real estate is being consumed? This is a huge problem for both private and public sector organizations. When you think about how many offices start swelling and then the need to move to a larger space or the need to add additional spaces, that's a really big expense for any organization to take on because you're using all this physical space that is being unused, and you can start rethinking about how you can actually use that physical space by thinking about people being more mobile within it. And then the last one is really productivity. How do you measure it, and also how do you make changes or improvements if people are using their own personal mobile technology versus what's being provided by the organization? So all of these factors are really important to really go through because what we're seeing are trends where employees will send personal information to their personal email in order to get it on their personal device to work more effectively when they're not at their desk. And so if you look at your own organization, if those same behaviors are being done, these big risk factors, among others, should be carefully looked at.
So, I think some of the things you're talking about would be true of almost any kind of sector or market. But when we're thinking about the government workforce, are there any other things that we should be looking at as public sector organizations consider the impact of mobility and, the changing employee work behavior as it plays out in their environment?
Absolutely. As I was saying earlier, we look at the millennial population as really good leading indicators. Those leading indicators have already started showing to be going throughout the entire workforce. But what's also important is to look at the demographic mix within the public sector. These stats that were available in terms of the federal public service by age, when you look at it, the millennial group, which would be the dark blue and the light blue lines, so this is the under 25 and the 25 to 34 segment, you can see that that age group over the years between 1983 and 2015 have been going down. That's a real interesting stat to keep watching, because at some point, as the age groups between the 45 through 65 age groups, so that would be the black through medium blue and the red, as those age groups continue to age and take on retirement, that means that public service must do two things. They must attract and retain the young talent needed to do the jobs, but there's a big impact to the organization because now you're bringing on huge amounts of new workforce that is expecting to work differently than a lot of public sector organizations traditionally are set up to do. These are individuals who are expecting to be able to use any device that they choose, including personal devices, at any time, from anywhere, the way they want, and in some cases using multiple devices at a time to make themselves more productive. And if these trends are not being seen today in public sector, there will be all of a sudden a massive demand for it because now you've got an overall large population change within the public service workforce that needs to be accommodated.
So, earlier we talked about the government's IT strategic plan, and so, there are these kind of demographic factors that you're talking about, and then some of the macro trends that you're seeing across the board. As they start to plan a strategy on how to contend with these, what would be some of the top issues that you think that they'll need to address? And then we'll maybe reach out to our audience today to see kind of how they might prioritize those.
Yeah, what we actually, when we started thinking about how do we start tackling this and what are some of the big issues that really needs to be addressed in order to hit those strategic plans, there were 4 things that seemed to come out very strongly when we were working through this and analyzing the information. Number 1, cost reduction. We see that when we see RFPs being issued by different organizations. We also see that just in demand in terms of the public domain and some of the language that's being used both within government services as well as some of the media. A second one that we see is also the improved public service delivery. I think that's top of mind for many individuals and a big thing that we need to ensure that we're constantly working on. The third one was overall improved productivity and efficiency. Very big hot topic, because if we can't get more budget for more people, we have to make people more effective. That's what it really comes down to. And then the fourth is really around modernization, modernizing how we work, especially if we have been plagued by many, many years of lack of investment into technology. That means that there's a quick catch-up that's required in order to hit the top 3 things. So modernizing how you work is really important.
So, I think depending on who you ask, some of those priorities may be higher than others. And we have quite a few people on the line with us at the moment. So maybe why don't we do a text poll and see how people would rate these and maybe discuss what the implications of that might be. And maybe you can just go over again for those who joined later in the webinar, how exactly they use their smartphones to give us some feedback.
That's right. Okay, so here's the instructions once again to take part in the text poll. I would like to remind everyone, all of the information or answers that you provide are fully confidential. We only look at the aggregate view to have a discussion here live with you, the audience, to see how everyone feels around some of these subject areas. To participate, you have 2 different options. The first is you can use your smartphone. All you need to do is pick up your smartphone and open up your text message application. You send the text message to the phone number 37607. The information you're going to put to register, you just write the word briefing. That's step number 2, and hit the send button, and then you'll receive confirmation that you're now participating in the text poll. So that is just to register. If you want to take advantage of this but you don't have access to your mobile phone at the moment, or you would rather use your computer, you can use the URL that's at the top of this slide by going to www.pollev.com/briefing, and you'll be able to participate there. So those 2 methods, one using your mobile phone and one using your web, and we encourage everyone to please participate because it'll make this much more interactive. So let's go to the first text poll. So what issue is your department more concerned with addressing out of those 4 items? Are you concerned with cost reduction, improved public service delivery, productivity and efficiency, or modernizing how you operate? All you have to do now to participate, you send the letter corresponding to the answer that you want to answer. So, for example, if you say cost reduction is the most important issue for your department to address, put A into your text message and just hit send. And again, you're sending it over to 37607. So let's give it a moment to see how the results are coming in, because these are live. Every text message and every selection on the web URL is coming in live, and we're seeing some pretty big trends so far. It looks like productivity and efficiency improvements are one of the hottest items, by cost reduction being the secondary on here.
This is quite interesting. While we wait for some of those to come in, Matt, I'd be very interested in, when you look at these issues and these priorities, we kind of think about technology and think, well, it's going to be those, running IT that make, the decisions around it. But who are the other stakeholders that you see? It doesn't have to be in government, but even in private sector. Are these kinds of things driven by, at the CEO level? Or is it other, members of the C-suite, or are there other people who influence it and say, you know what, we have to, even if they don't say we have to pursue a mobile workforce strategy, they sort of are that catalyst to, get these issues on the table?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of us look to IT to set the agenda for us. IT is absolutely taking a much more strategic role at the table of helping to solve some of the business problems. But the reality is a lot of the agenda is set by various different stakeholders within an organization. The leader of the operations team, think about a contact center. The leader, whether it's a director or a higher up role, is actually playing a much bigger role within the decision-making process on technology than you would expect. And that's because they are much closer to the needs of their organization, and they're also looking at different solutions to solve their unique problems. Same sort of thing when we look at public sector, the sales leadership is often driving it. So maybe this would actually be people who are, in the field doing things directly with the public. Think about public service centers. Individuals within that space are going to have very different needs and have to be part of that decision process, or be an influencer within the decision process at least. And so this is really important to think about your own individual organization and how you can become an influencer to the IT team so they know exactly what it is that you guys need, and they can help deliver the solutions to meet those needs to get the outcomes. So I think, Shane, we're seeing some pretty clear trends
I think
here.
the verdicts are in. I have to say I'm kind of surprised. I think I was sort of assuming that improved public service delivery would be a little higher than it is, but I'm interested in your take on this, Matthew. Is it more perhaps that, cost reduction and productivity is very inherently measurable, so perhaps those are a means to an end in terms of if we get those things in place, maybe the improved service delivery comes, or how would you interpret this poll?
I think you hit it straight on. What we're seeing here are some very clear measurable items, but what we also need to recognize is that these four things are not standalone. They are intrinsically related in one manner or another. You can never get to cost reduction unless you're also doing some modernizing of your operations, because it requires investments in new technology that are going to help take cost out of an organization. That's a good way to look at it. I think productivity and efficiency improvements are, I'm not that surprised that that's a really big one, because I think that's also extremely top of mind, and if you can get the productivity and efficiency improvements while doing some cost reduction, chances are you're probably well on your way to also helping to improve your public service delivery. So it's a really good thing to look at, and we'll have some follow-up discussion on what this all can mean as well.
So I think in some ways these poll results lead exactly into our next area that we're going to discuss, which is having more ubiquitous access for people to access data and applications is fantastic, but it also means that in some cases you're dealing with a more distributed workforce, harder sometimes to get everybody on the same page, which I think is why, over the last number of years, unified communications has been such a hot topic, not just in the public sector, but in so many other organizations. How do you see kind of the opportunity around unified communications and this drive to the modern mobile workforce converging? What can we expect?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because I think everyone has looked at these as very standalone technologies. Even when we're looking at doing an RFP to replace technology, oftentimes we are looking at the technology we have and we're looking at the replacement or the next generation of that same technology. But we've seen a real collision of technology over the last couple of years. And some of these collisions mean that we actually have to rethink the consumption of technology, because sometimes some things are going to be eliminated or there's a more effective way of doing it. IDC again has been able to find that the wireless integration with unified communications is going to be extremely important. It really goes beyond users taking advantage of basic email, contact information and calendaring functions, and just phone services as well. But we're seeing the collision where people want to use all of these things together at the same time. So let's look at some of the data that we have here that maybe can help spell this out. We did some polling actually to try to find out what's happening across all different segments, small, medium, large, and public sector organizations. And what we saw was that a lot of the decisions are being driven largely by the interest in cloud and mobility and collaboration, with some context around collaboration. In fact, what we saw was that 72% of Canadian firms either have or they will be implementing unified communications and collaborations in the next 2 years. But actually, 60% of those businesses polled by Rogers said that they were somewhat or very likely to drop the wireline voice altogether. So what we mean by that is traditional landlines, whether it's Centrex or another landline, or it's related to their phone system, a fixed phone system sitting on a desk, where 60% of businesses said that they're looking at getting rid of that fixed connection completely. That's quite interesting because they're saying that they want to replace unified communications. 72% want to replace it or are on the road to replacing it, but they also want to get rid of that fixed communication. That means they need to replace it in a different way. When we look at some other global trends, unified communications spending is really shifting from premise-based spending to cloud-based. So this is on the right-hand side where you see the bar graph. The blue is the growth on cloud-based, and it's clearly outstripping that of premise-based. In fact, I've spent the last couple of years going coast to coast speaking to organizations of all sizes in both public and private. And I have yet to come to one organization that was indicating that they were going to actually replace their unified communications with a premise-based system. Everyone is looking to the cloud. So that's a big trend we need to be very aware of. But that still doesn't tell me the mobile story. So let's look at the next set of data that we were able to get our hands on. What we have here are 3 different lines, and this is actually the aggregate growth that's been modeled out by IDC between 2015 and 2019. The red line is the growth of premise-based systems for unified communications globally. The blue line is cloud-based, so you can see that you're looking at a much greater growth. But the black line is the new factor in this. So you can see that the black line portion that is going to be growing at a much faster rate, and that goes back to some of those data points we just looked at. This is unified communications and collaborations in mobile context, meaning that people want to do what they do off the traditional unified communications platform on a desk. They want to be able to do it on their mobile now. And so they're making decisions on the technology and based off of the fact of doing it on mobile.
Now, I think a lot of people would look at this and, immediately recognize some of these benefits and some of the opportunities that are in front of them. I think we want to be extremely cognizant, though, of the day-to-day realities and the challenges that these organizations face. So we're actually going to go to our second poll, and we wanted to just get a read on, where you sit along some of these potential issues. And these are things that I think are true of almost any major tech transition that I've covered as a journalist, whether that was moving to the cloud or, moving to data analytics and so forth. We break it down into, change management. So really just getting people used to working the old way to working the new way. There's a lot that's involved in that, and you're really dealing with a lot of people issues. There's day-to-day administration. So, you're used to just, running a certain set of systems or a certain set of processes, and now you have, this much more to consider or factor in. And, we could put this actually at the beginning because it's usually what drives it, but that leadership or procurement buy-in, time and time again, CIOs and other senior business leaders tell me that if the support is not there from the top, that it's just not going to go anywhere because they literally will not get the green light to start a project. So breaking those down, we've got people voting right away, which is great. So we'll just kind of give you guys a few minutes to work through those, and then Matt, I'm going to ask you to give your take, I guess, on how much this matches up to what you're seeing maybe in other sectors or just more broadly speaking holistically.
Yes. Some really interesting results coming in already.
Yeah.
So again, just for those that maybe didn't vote last time, remember there's 2 ways to vote. You can either use your phone, text 37607 as the phone number, and then answer A, B, or C in the subject line and hit send, or you can go to pollev.com/briefing and you'll be able to vote. So it looks like we're seeing a pretty clear trend. A little bit of movement on B in the last minute or two, but it looks like A has not moved very much. It's mostly between B and C at this point.
Yeah, I'm going to call it and say that I think that change management is definitely emerging as the lion's share, and maybe it's, it made sense that we put that at the top. But like I said, when you introduce the technology, it can work completely as expected, but there's beyond just kind of training, there's a lot of things that fall into that. And I've talked to all kinds of IT leaders that said, well, we didn't even realize how things were actually working until we implemented this technology, and then we had to deal with all the change around that. So I guess, what are some of the things that you've noticed in working with real life customers, Matt, and maybe any kind of top line advice on how they should think about those change management issues going into something like UC?
Yeah, I think first, I'm not that surprised by the results. I actually anticipated change management, especially when we're talking about public sector, to be the number one thing. And going back to some of those age demographics that we were looking at just a few minutes ago, usually what we've seen in most organizations, two factors. The demographic of their workforce population is going to help be an indicator in terms of which of these three issues are going to be the most difficult. Other factors also include how dispersed is their workforce. Are they all congregating into a few large sites, or are they dispersed over many sites and people working from home? That tends to be a bigger issue on day-to-day administration. And then from and how they work in terms of the overall leadership. So, we've got a 2020 strategic plan that's been set out. So we've got leadership buy-in from the top trying to push an agenda and try to help facilitate change. So that changes the dynamic. But if you've got a leadership that really is not into it and they're just worried about cost and other areas, having leadership buy-in is very difficult, and so that might actually speak to even individual departments within the public sector that might be very traditional in the way that they're thinking and operating, especially when they think about the dynamics around their own workforce. So it's very unique department by department, but I think what's great about this is, change management and leadership buy-in both, again, go hand in hand together, that, without the right kind of leadership at the top, change management usually doesn't go too well at the bottom because they're not helping to set the tone for what the organization needs to do.
So people have some choices to make. You could argue that you could do nothing and, just sort of stay as is. Now, you talked about, some of the potential benefits here. If governments hold back, what are some of the risks that they might run, whether it's, failing to meet the expectations of citizens, their own, internal employees, or other stakeholders that, are kind of experiencing some of these changes and are moving more quickly?
Yeah, I actually see three overarching options to really look at when you're thinking about introducing new technology, especially trying to embrace the modern mobile workforce. Thinking about unified communications and mobility technology colliding together and enabling people to work very differently. So you have three options of how you can approach it. The first one is your status quo. So this is leaving things as is. It's all around price reduction. So out of those big issues you want to solve, leaving everything as is, price reduction is going to be your one lever you're able to pull to try to accommodate some of that 2020 plan. And that's by issuing an RFP and trying to shave a couple points of margin by reducing your monthly recurring cost on a service. That's going to, there's a certain point where you can only reduce cost to a certain level, and then you have nothing else you can do from a status quo. The impact to this, it's a temporary budgetary relief. There is an end of the line in terms of how low you can go, and then you're going to have to figure out how you accommodate for the rest of your issues you need to solve for. You're also not driving any additional improvements in your organization because everything is as is, and there is no change management required. So it's the easy option that we generally go for because everyone continues to work the way they were working, and we're just getting our cost out of the business as much as possible. Your second option is a direct replacement. So this is where you're doing a like-for-like rip and replace for a more modern version of the same thing you have. So I'll give you some context. You might have a phone system, thinking about unified communications, you might have a phone system that's end of life, maybe it's 10, 15 years old, and that phone system needs to be replaced. A direct replacement of that phone system would be that you go through what that phone system does, how it works, and you issue an RFP, and you replace the phone system for a more modern version of the same thing effectively. But again, it's still a physical phone system. You might stick it in a data center and have someone manage it for you, so you're removing some of that, but what the technology does is identical to what it did before. It's just in a shinier new package, and maybe you have a new phone that's not as old and grimy. what the impact is, it's familiar and it's easy for change management to roll this out within the workforce, which is great, but it's limited improvements. Generally, you're only getting nominal changes on new features and maybe some new hardware, but there's very little improvement beyond that because, again, you're replacing like for like what you had before. And from a cost savings perspective, it's really unknown if you're going to get cost savings. In fact, most cases when you're doing a rip and replace, you're adding cost to the business because you are replacing with new technology and you have to pay for that, as well as all the project management and everything else. The third option is where you actually look at full transformation. So this is getting rid of all of your existing services and really trying to address the mobile workforce head on. We've got a situation, people aren't at their desk, they're using mobile phones, they're using their own personal mobile phones, we need a solve for it. So the impact here, if it's done right, you can actually get some cost savings because you're not replacing what's not being used anymore, so you don't need to buy a new desk phone, you don't need to worry about all of the cabling. In fact, if people aren't at their desk, maybe you don't even need to worry about replacing desks when your workforce grows. Maybe people can work more effectively by sharing workspaces. You're able to transform how the workforce operates because now you're giving them the ability to do what they need to do, but on their mobile phone. But change management's unknown, depending on how it rolls out. If this is something, if you're asking for behaviors for how someone does their day-by-day work from what they're already doing, change management is a big factor. But if you're asking people to continue what they're doing on their mobile phone and we're just making it more effective for them, maybe change management's not as big of an issue. So it's a bit of an unknown.
So I think if people have signed up for this webinar, it's because they probably fall into, camps 2 and 3 in terms of what they're considering. We've talked in very general terms about, some of the ways that people could pursue this. But if they were to, engage directly with a Rogers to, pursue a mobile workforce strategy, what do you have in place today that they could start to consider and make some of the changes that you're describing?
Yeah, so Rogers has actually invested quite a bit of time and effort in terms of developing a solution that really addresses the modern mobile workforce. What we introduced in 2016 is Rogers Unison, which is a real first for Canada. In fact, we were the first carrier in North America to do this, but it's a trend that started in Europe with over 4 million subscribers in Europe, and it's also being supported now in the US as well. But what we've done is we've taken that cloud-based unified communications platform and we integrated it into our mobile network, enabling people to use, whether it's an IP desk phone or they're using a soft phone, perhaps on a tablet or a desktop computer, or their mobile phone directly as part of the phone system. So that means that an employee who has already kind of transitioned to being mobile first and they're never at their desk and they're using their mobile phone for everything, you can now let them use their mobile phone and continue that way, but they're still part of the phone system in the cloud, just like someone who's sitting on their desk with a soft phone or a desk phone. What Rogers Unison is, it's a full cloud-based unified communications platform, and it's managed by Rogers in our network on your behalf, so there's no big, huge phone system that you're having to buy. What's great about it is we are using mobility as the common telephony experience across any location and across any network. That means that you can use your mobile phone over the mobile network, you can use Wi-Fi, you can also use your local area network and also your home internet connection to communicate. Any of those network access points over a computer, a tablet, a mobile phone, all work seamlessly together. It's fully supported by a professional services team that does all of the onboarding as well as the technical support, and it replaces all of the key features that you'd expect out of a phone system. So even if someone is going completely to their mobile, they still can do extension dialing on their mobile phone. A receptionist can still see their status if they need to transfer a call to that individual. Even if they're on a call on their mobile phone, they can see that they're on a call. And people can be part of hunt groups and auto attendance. So, nothing that you're not sacrificing any key feature by going in this direction. And then, of course, lastly, we're not forcing people to use an app, so it's not tying up your data consumption on your mobile phone. We're using your standard voice plan, which is great because that is the most cost-effective way to communicate when you're on your mobile phone. Out of this, we have 3 different users. We have a mobile user, so this an individual who only is using a mobile phone. These are people who traditionally are fully mobile. They're salespeople, field workers, maintenance, construction. But when we think about that 50% that are never at their cubicle, a huge percentage of those people would say, I'd rather just use my mobile phone. We also have a hybrid user, so this is an individual. They're sometimes in the office, sometimes on the road. Think about power users, those management and executive level ranks that require the best of everything. They're using a mobile phone and they're also using IP phones or soft phones, and they want to be able to use them seamlessly. So they just answer the device that works best for them at that time, and they can also move a call from one device to another without interruption on the other end. Very powerful way that the service works. And then of course your traditional office users. So these are individuals that do need a desk phone type experience where they work from a cubicle, for example. Well, usually the receptionist, contact center agents kind of fall into that bucket. And what we actually help solve out of this is some real big items. One, we're helping to remove a lot of unnecessary cost because we're not asking people to replace their phone system with another phone system. It's getting rid of the phone system and moving fully to the cloud and eliminating everything associated with a phone system, from buying it, the project management of standing it up, and all of the hardware associated with it, and then all of the connectivity to make it work. And then there's maintenance and licensing. It goes on and on. That's all eliminated. We also reduce a lot of the complication, especially when we think about change management. If an employee makes a phone call on their mobile phone today without Rogers Unison, and then we add Rogers Unison, the way they make a phone call on their mobile phone is the exact same way tomorrow. So we solve for that change management issue. So employees who are using their mobile phone can continue doing the same. We're just giving them a lot more tools and technology to make them more effective without making them change how they're actually doing their work. So it's improving the user experience. And then we're also giving the organization a lot more control over what happens on the mobile phone and a lot more security because we're encrypting 100% of the calls over any network, whether on a mobile phone, soft phone, or an IP phone. It's all encrypted across any network, and that means that there's a lot more security, and as we add in more value-add services, you can take advantage of more, but you're managing it centrally from the cloud.
So this is a great opportunity. If people on the line have some questions, if you look again at the sort of webinar console on your screen, there's an area where you can type in questions to us, and we're happy to work through as many of those as we can in the time that's permitted. I'll actually just sort of keep on rolling and kicking things off in that respect. So in one of our polls, we kind of looked at some of the top issues that people were sort of contending with. Can you get it all more specific, Matt, about how would Rogers Unison help more specifically with things like cost reduction or change management, end user adoption, all those kinds of things?
Absolutely. So some key benefits that you can look at through embracing the mobile work, because employees, one, get to choose the technology that works best for them. Do they want a mobile phone, soft phone, or IP phone, or a combination of them together? And it also is freeing them up from their desks with one phone number across all of their devices that just works. They get to keep their phone numbers as well. They keep their extensions if they were using it as well. So there's no change on that. And so we've really simplified their change management on it. It's also extremely future-proofed. We've talked about some of the trends that are happening around mobile. If you don't embrace it today, what will happen is that there will be a point where you have to embrace it, and making those decisions today on future proofing will help facilitate those future issues that you're trying to address. So today, if improved productivity and efficiency is the most important, but later on improved public service delivery becomes important because you solved for productivity and efficiency, then we're hopefully giving you the right technology to set you up in the future to achieve some of those things. Because as the technology evolves and upgrades, we're pushing that from the cloud to you, and you don't need to worry about all of those things happening again. And of course, it's extremely adaptable. It works over across any network, as I've mentioned, in a secure manner. It is cloud, so you can add employees to it with ease. Makes it very, very quick for making changes. So hopefully we've solved for a lot of those issues that we're trying to address within that 2020 plan. At the end of the day, Rogers Unison is Canada's only truly mobile communication system that we believe is going to foster true collaboration and productivity. We're facilitating employees to get up out of their cubicle, go and solve a problem on a whiteboard with your peers, and bring your technology with you. To me, that's real collaboration, and we can help do that. We're helping organizations be much more nimble so they can grow or contract out as needed where they can be flexible in the way they do work, and we're reducing cost and infrastructure at the same time. So we really think that we've solved a lot of the problems that we've discussed here on this webinar, but why don't we turn it over to the audience? We've got a few minutes left. I think we are around 5-6 minutes left. If there's questions, this is probably a great opportunity. If you haven't had a chance to type in your question, if there's something you'd like to know or have us answer. And Shane, if there's any questions you're already seeing, why don't we get started?
Yeah, for sure. So first question is, you mentioned earlier the breakdown of mobile users, hybrid users, and office users. As companies get more mature with unified communications, do you foresee a rise in more hybrid workers? And should we be preparing for that?
That is a fantastic question. So my belief as a product leader when we were building it out, that the hybrid user is going to be our most popular. And the reason why is because it's true fixed and mobile convergence, where we're taking traditional desk phone technology and merging it with mobile, and an employee who's got a mobile phone and they have a cell phone on their desktop can seamlessly pull the call going between the two. And I believe that's going to be our top seller, and it's actually my recommendation for the public sector, federal government, as we've worked through on all of the purchasing vehicle. I put forward that my recommendation was the hybrid user is going to be the #1 because I think it's going to solve more problems than any of them. But we've made it flexible that people can move between them as much as possible. But the trend will be the hybrid user because it's giving you the best of everything. And why wouldn't we want that?
Right. Kind of related question. Does this mean the desk phone is eventually going to die?
Another great question. I believe it will in most cases. So I think that the desk phone for your average employee will eventually go away. What won't get eliminated is someone who needs a special needs device, whether it's for visual or hearing impairment. And it's not going to get rid of conferencing units and maybe courtesy or emergency phones, but I think the physical hardware isn't really needed that much, especially bandwidth has become so ubiquitous in both home and business lives. You travel to hotels and there's Wi-Fi everywhere, and if you can have a phone on your computer versus a physical phone and you can bring your computer anywhere with you and it's a laptop, I think that's a really effective way to work. So I don't use a physical phone other than my mobile phone. I use soft phones, and like I've got a headset plugged into my computer right now and it's all off Wi-Fi. Great quality of service. I think this is the future.
I like this question because it kind of reminds me of our earlier poll. What does this really mean for service delivery?
What it means for service delivery is that you can completely rethink how you deliver service. If employees can work from anywhere at any time using any device, it means that people don't need to necessarily be stuck in an office. Think about the traffic problems in some of our major city centers because everyone is trying to get to the office, generally in the same area, at the same time, and it causes a lot of traffic, and we sometimes have very restrictive hours on service delivery because we force people to do, say, a 9 to 5 because everyone must go to the home office to get their work done off the corporate network. But if people could perhaps work from home, maybe those hours could be flexible, and maybe service delivery can be a little bit more in tune with what the general public wants, especially if the majority of people are working during 9 to 5. How do they ever get serviced on hours outside of that? So this is how we can start rethinking how people would work and maybe what that means from a service delivery perspective.
Excellent. Well, we are coming close to the top of the hour, so if there are some other questions that we didn't get to in this time frame, we will follow up with you directly as quickly as possible to get you the answers that you need. There's a lot more information about the opportunities around unified communications and the general theme of embracing a modern mobile workforce. I would encourage the audience to check out the Business Forum website that is run by Rogers Communications that really delves into a lot of these things at the enterprise level for small businesses and everybody else. I'd also like to remind people that there will be a survey at the end of this webinar. Please, if you can take some time to fill that out, it will really help us to continue to refine and improve this kind of program, and as we develop more kinds of content like this to help solve some business challenges. But at this point, I would just like to thank everybody for being a part of today's session. I'd especially like to thank Matthew Leppanen, the Director of Product Management for Unified Communications of the Rogers Enterprise Business Unit. Thank you on behalf of everybody on the team. Once again, my name is Shane Schick. It's been my pleasure to be a part of this webinar today. And with that, I'll say thank you for your time and have a great rest of your day.
And thank you, Shane, as well. It's been a pleasure doing this webinar with you, and I really want to thank all of the participants for joining. And I believe this is also being made available if you needed to re-watch it just in case you missed something and want to follow up. So thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great day.